Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Hayg Astourian, and today I'm going to give you some information about zero trust security, kind of a really important new trend in cybersecurity. And really quickly, I would like if you could raise your hands if you've heard of zero trust security before. Okay, and keep it up if you feel like you know what it is. Okay, thanks so much. So, a little bit about me. I'm currently the Vice President of Engineering at Tumo. And I'm sure if I asked you all to raise your hands and say whether you knew Tumo had an engineering team, many of you would not raise your hands. And yes, Tumo does have an engineering team, and it's actually quite large software engineering team. Now we're at 25 people and 3 teams inside of the organization, which I lead. We are actually a really core part of Tumo's success. The software that our team makes is used by the students to learn, by our content team to produce content, and by pretty much all of the operations staff at Tumo's to run the centers. So Tumo has had this software since its early existence, but people just don't know about it. We haven't done a good job of marketing, but we do have a quite advanced software engineering team. So now you know. Before this, I worked at Stripe as the manager of the platform security team. That team actually had a very, very broad scope, including cloud security and a lot of the zero trust architecture, which you'll learn more about, hopefully, in this presentation. And I think, as you'll see, I'm going to share the things that I agree with zero trust and the things that I think are true based on my experience. So I'm going to try to really give you what I've found to be true in industry, from the really high-level tech companies, how they do it, what they value. So not just, ChatGPT post about zero trust. So you're probably wondering, especially since most of you haven't heard of zero trust, why should I care? And I think that's a really good question because you should value your time and you should know why you're learning things. So I hope to kind of give you some context. Really, zero trust has taken off across both the public sector and the private sector, so government and companies, enterprises. And I'll give you some quick facts to help color that more. One of them is this executive order for the US government from May 2021 that the Biden administration issued. And in this executive order, President Biden basically told every federal agency in the United States government, which is a huge, huge government, and the premier cyber power in the world, that they should draft plans for migrating to a zero trust architecture. So that is a very, very big vote of confidence that this is a good direction, that the President of the United States is instructing the entire US government to draft plans to go in that direction. These lists of technology partners are all companies that are working with the US government to come up with standards and plans, reference architectures. These are companies that either have implemented a zero trust architecture themselves or they sell something which is a part of a zero trust architecture. So Google, for example, is famously one of the first companies to really come out and say with their Beyond Corp paper. Oh, wow. Well, this is still on. That's good. Are we back? Okay. Test. Okay, cool. So Google famously was one of the first companies to publicly talk about getting rid of VPNs, moving to... Yeah, I'm giving up on them. Oh my gosh. I don't know. I'm going to try without the microphone for a bit, and then if it stays on, I'll go back. So Google is famously one of the companies that was very open about how it did Beyond Corp and published a lot of material on it. But also I will say that Stripe, a lot of the other really big tech companies have all gone this direction. So that's another big kind of vote of confidence from some of the most advanced companies in the world. And just some context about the economic activity with Zero Trust. It's estimated currently it's like approximately 25 billion market for Zero Trust products and activity services. But it's estimated that in just 4 years, it'll more than double to 60 billion. So we're talking about something that's really growing. Companies are in, governments are in, and it's really taken off with, it's expected to kind of get bigger and bigger. So this is something that's happening. I'm sure we'll see aspects of it in our own lives, in the coming years. So with my cybersecurity background, I'm pretty biased, and I really want people to get into the cybersecurity industry. So just sharing also this kind of general data point that, I'll use the microphone now, I guess. Test, okay. Sharing a general data point that estimated in last year, 2022, that there were 4.7 million people working in cybersecurity, but there was 3.4 million empty jobs. So, and that was growing. The gap is growing. So for almost every person who's employed in cybersecurity, there's an open job that is unfilled. So there just is a huge, huge job shortage, and that's not expected to go away because of major trends like digital transformation. As everything becomes digital, as everything becomes run by AI, by software, you have to protect it, right? Or your societies are going to have major problems. So think about getting into cybersecurity. So hopefully at this point, this says, okay, I sort of care, tell me what it is, the audience. So hopefully you feel some of that you sort of care now. So I'm going to tell you about Zero Trust architecture. So here you see this beautiful building, clean lines, clear shape, smooth lines, curves, wonderful sturdy pillar. Unfortunately, that's not what it is. I wish it looked like this, but actually it's a lot more like this. It's very foggy. Kind of you hear Zero Trust. Everyone is trying to say, my product is Zero Trust. My product's Zero Trust. Buy my product. It's Zero Trust. So because of that, if you search for Zero Trust on Google, you're going to see everyone saying something kind of different with some things in common, but also a lot of things that are very different. So I'm going to try to give you what I think are the important parts of this idea, and I'm going to try to give it to you in a simple and clear way that might not be what a lot of other people say, but I think having worked on it, I think that this is what matters and that this is at least what the big tech companies are focusing on a lot of the time. So the MIT Lincoln Laboratory spent like 6 months researching this. They support the federal government, and the definition they came up with is the one that I really liked after kind of reviewing everything that I could find out there. They say, Zero Trust is a set of security principles that treats every component, service, and user of a system as continually exposed to and potentially compromised by a malicious adversary. So this idea is basically that everything is under attack, everything might already be compromised. And I think, I don't know, to me that seems kind of like not that radical. I'm sure, I hope some of you in the audience are like, yeah, that makes sense, right? Everything can get attacked, everything's on the internet, hackers get in. I think now we've seen how, there's major companies getting hacked every single day. Data breach, data breach, data breach. It's all over the news to the point we don't care anymore. So we're like, yeah, everything's getting hacked. So it's actually kind of obvious, right? But actually, the traditional kind of good guidance, maybe from the 90s, but it's kind of persisted, and this is how most companies have architected their security nowadays. You hope they have, but actually it's not quite this. Is more like the castle metaphor. Raise your hand if you've heard of the castle metaphor for cybersecurity. Okay, so I'll go into this. So basically with the castle metaphor, it's really about this principle of defense in depth. So with the castle metaphor, you have the water. That's one layer of security, right? You can't have, people can't attack you because they can't get through the water. Then you have this huge outer wall, which is maybe your most important protection. But you'll notice that actually in the very center, there's also the keep. It's the central part of the castle. And to get into that area, maybe where the king lives, you also have to get through another layer of walls. So there's multiple layers, multiple lines of defense. And if you get past those layers and you get into the center of the castle, yeah, you can kill the king. You could do whatever you want. But you have to get past those layers. And yeah, that's not easy to do, right? But in actuality, it's more referred to jokingly as the M&M model. So I think everyone knows M&Ms or Smarties in Europe. I don't know. In Armenia, I think there's M&Ms. But you do have the hard exterior. You have the hard outside. But it's not very hard, actually. It's actually, it's like kind of, it's more like an egg. And then on the inside, you have this delicious, sweet, thing that attackers want to get at. They want that sweet sugar. They want that sweet data. And it's very soft on the inside, right? And this model has failed. This does not work. So even in Armenia, this is kind of the model. It's the M&M model pretty much everywhere. And over, Armenian companies, not only the companies, have been getting hacked. Armenian data has been getting breached, leaked. But it's not just Armenia. This is really a global problem. This is a sign of just how much work we have to do in cybersecurity, which kind of reflects why there are so many open jobs, right? And not only has this model failed, it's getting worse and worse because of trends in the world of technology. So these aren't even all the trends. These are just the ones that kind of popped into my head and felt pretty important and are mentioned. They're not all my ideas or anything, by the way. But a big one is cloud adoption and the use of software as a service, services. Why is this a problem? Well, if you have your castle, people go through your security checks. You have all the stuff that's important in one place. Maybe they go onto a computer. It doesn't have connection to the internet. It's air-gapped, maximum security. That can kind of work in some places. But realistically, for modern enterprises, modern companies, modern organizations, you're probably using Gmail. You're probably using Slack. The presentation before mine, talked a lot about the cloud, Azure. You have stuff in the cloud. Okay. How do you build a wall around that? You don't even own it anymore. You've basically given your resources to others to take care of. That's like kind of what the cloud is. And sure, yeah, you can configure it, you can control it. But fundamentally, you're trusting them and you're putting it on their servers, not yours, right? So how can you build a castle around that? It doesn't really work. And SaaS is the same thing. Companies, to be competitive, they're taking on dependencies, using services. They get to go faster. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. But yeah, same problem. Your sensitive data is somewhere else now. How do you build a wall around that? You don't even know if they have a wall, but you're kind of doing it because it's easy, it's fast, it's productive, right? And that's okay. I'm not saying that, users should change their behavior, like bad them, they're being insecure. I'm just saying that the world has changed and we don't have the luxury of trying to build a castle anymore. Remote work, of course, COVID-19 really changed everything, right? A lot more remote work, a lot more doing things from home, from cafes, maybe not even on company devices, right? Or organization devices. And so now you're a bureaucrat at the castle and you need to work on the files at the castle, but you're in the neighboring village. So how do you actually get at those files securely? Maybe someone folds them into a paper airplane and throws them to you from the walls, but that's not very secure. And here I also have supply chain attacks, insider threat. These are also things that are on the rise. The US government was very, very badly compromised by the SolarWinds hack. I don't know if people are familiar, but it was a supply chain attack where basically there are a lot of ways to get behind the walls, is the main takeaway I want everyone to have here. In Verizon's latest DBER report for 2023, they said that 20% of compromises, of breaches, are happening by insider threats, either on purpose or not on purpose. So what is an insider threat? Maybe it's the staff at the castle is getting paid off. Maybe they work for a foreign government. And yeah, they're being evil. Or they're going against your interests. And of course you let them into the keep. You let them into the very heart of the system because that's where they belong, right? They're trusted. They're an insider. But now once they're in there, they can do whatever they want. So even with many layers of security, that's not good enough. Did it sleep on me? Yeah, so basically the point is the model doesn't work, it's failed, and the smart companies have realized this, the US government has realized this, and they're changing their approach because this simply doesn't work anymore. Oh. Okay, we're back. Thank you. Another issue here is that the reasons to attack companies are also growing. For one thing, and I won't go over all of these points, but the ones I really want to emphasize are the last two. Ransomware. Raise your hand if you've heard of ransomware. Okay, cool. So basically, attackers have figured out how to make money from attacking companies and attacking governments, attacking oil pipelines. This has meant that there's a whole economy around attacking and breaking into companies and destroying companies now. And of course, that means there's more reasons to attack this weak security model. The other one that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of is called digital transformation. And digital transformation is essentially saying, you know, we need to evolve our companies, we need to take advantage of technology, or our companies or organizations will be left behind, they won't be competitive. And so all these organizations are now thinking about how do I take advantage of digital technology? And with that come all of the risks of digital technology. So there's more and more valuable data being created every single day. And that trend is only going to increase, especially as you look at AI and you look at taking advantage of what you need to create AI models. You need data. How do we create the data? Something to steal now. So incentives are growing. All of this stuff is connected, and we're still relying on this weak model. And now there's more reasons to attack the model, and the model is getting weaker. So you can see how there's all these trends converging to bad outcomes. And this whole time, I still haven't told you about zero trust. Maybe finally now you're wondering, how does zero trust help? And the definition from the MIT Lincoln Lab really captures it. It's just expecting and preparing for things to be compromised. That's it. Now here, I have 5 security principles, because remember from the earlier definition, it's a set of security principles. So it's not a technology, it's not something you buy. Zero trust is about applying these principles. These are the 5 that the MIT Lincoln Lab said are relevant to zero trust. But ultimately, I think it's really about like 3 of them. And these security principles were defined in 1974, I think, in a paper. So it just goes to show the thinking about how to do security, like the core ideas, hasn't really changed in almost 50 years, so which is pretty wild. And zero trust is really about applying those principles in a disciplined way, taking advantage of what's available to us today in terms of technology. So the three that I want to talk about are least privilege, complete mediation, and psychological acceptability. Raise your hand if you've heard of least privilege. That's like so least privilege and defense in depth are the two security principles you hear a lot. But I'll go ahead and define least privilege for you. Essentially, the idea is, which is very intuitive, you only give components of your system, people, services, the access that they require. So for me to do what I need to do for my role in an organization, I need certain access to data, to services, to compute, to the cloud, whatever. Now, I don't necessarily need access to more than that, and I shouldn't have that access. And I should only have that access when I need it. And that's the core idea. If you could really get to that point where you could just give people the access that they need when they need it, that would be the optimal, ideal realization of least privilege. Complete mediation. So nowadays, or let's say in 2000s, you go to a website, you sign in, you stay signed in. If someone hacks your computer, they're still signed in. They can do everything you can do in that account. And so really the authentication and authorization is happening at one point, and that's being maintained after that, never checked again indefinitely. Maybe there's an automatic account logout. Maybe it's like, 30 days will log you out and you do it again. But this idea is saying that the ideal is that you're constantly checking. And this is one of the core ideas of zero trust. You don't get lazy. You check every single time. How can you do that, right? That's really expensive. Are you going to make people type in their username and password, every minute? So clearly there's technologies behind this that make this more possible. Things have changed that let us get closer to the ideal of checking every single request. And the last one that I want to talk about is psychological acceptability, which is like a really, really, really kind of, I think, awkward way of saying that we should care about user experience. And fundamentally, why does user experience matter in security? It's because if you make something hard to do, if it's difficult to do, it's less likely that people will do it. If you make it simple and easy to do, it's more likely that people will do it. It's just probability, right? So if you make the secure thing easy to do, then you're going to get more secure behaviors from people. And so psychological acceptability is very important. Even ignoring the concerns of circumventing, let's say you're trying to make some changes in your organization for security reasons, but you make it so everyone's miserable, everyone hates you. Eventually enough people are unhappy that it's rolled back. Now you got no security. So there's always a sense of political will, support that you need in any organization to make it more secure. And if you do something unpopular that people don't like, you're way less likely to be able to keep the secure improvements that you're trying to make. So user experience really matters for security. I have a very high opinion of UX and UI people. So yeah, I've noticed sometimes people are like, oh, backend is more elite or something, but I think UX, UI people are amazing. And it's really, really difficult to do. So I've talked about principles. Now there's really 6 components I want to talk about of the zero trust architecture. These are from, again, the MIT Lincoln Lab research, which I really just think is like the best that I found. So the first 3 components are identity verification, access control, and resource protection. So I'm going to go through each of these, and they're pretty intuitive, so should be good. And for identity, these are the things that I think really matter. So this is my personal view, but these aren't new ideas, right? I'm not the thought leader who came up with these things. But I'm just telling you from my experience that I think these things really matter. Identity has to be high confidence. And I think that's one of the most important parts of identity. So what is identity, right? It's kind of a weird term if you haven't worked in security, or I guess you've seen it in cloud, right? Identity and access management, things like that. But let's say I go to a government office, and at that government office, they ask me for my ID card, right? They want to know who you are. And I give them the ID card. And in this country, I don't know how it is in Armenia, but let's say in this imaginary country, the ID card is like written in crayon. It's just a piece of printer paper. And essentially, it's a very low quality, very forgeable document, right? And with this very forgeable document, I show it to them, and they say, okay, you really are, you are President Biden. And I say, yes, I am. And from there, they're like, okay, I'll give you the nuclear launch codes because you proved who you are. And this is a very tongue-in-cheek example, but essentially it's saying that authorization, which is to say what someone should have access to, is completely based on authentication, which is about proving who you are. So let's say I have very restrictive controls. I've done perfect access control. Everyone only has access to what they should have access to, but I can impersonate anyone. I can pretend to be anyone, and the system will believe me. Okay, then all of that access control didn't matter because I can just become the person who has access and fool the system. So this is fundamentally kind of about like identity theft. So it's very important that in our system, we have a high confidence. We're very sure that, whatever component is saying it is, whoever a person is saying they are, that is true. We really, 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 really need that to be true. And we also want identity to be accessible. So if I can only prove who I am inside of the castle walls, then I can't, work from my village remotely, and I can't prove to Gmail or to Slack who I am, right? So we really want identity to be something that maybe is cloud-based, maybe we're using Okta, doesn't have to be, right? But we're using something that is accessible everywhere we need it. So with like classical Active Directory setups, that's not the case, right? The AD server is hidden behind the VPN. You can only prove who you are if you're on the VPN or if you're on site at the office. So in this new model, I want to be able to prove who I am to all of the different services, cloud things that I use, wherever they may be. And finally, it should be fast and simple. So again, my earlier example, if you have to type in your username and password every single minute, you're going to go find the security person and you're going to start throwing things at them and telling them like, look, this isn't working. So that's about the psychological acceptability. And for most organizations, for Armenia, for most organizations, depending on where they are, identity is probably the first place to start, I think. Again, from the Verizon DBER report, they bring up this point that approximately 50% of breaches involved stolen credentials. So that is exactly the kind of identity theft that I'm talking about, right? They were able to get credentials to gain access to things that they shouldn't gain access to. And this is a vicious loop. A company gets hacked, their database gets dumped, usernames and passwords get retrieved from that database. Those same users reuse the same password, which I'm sure in this room some of us are guilty of, right? We've probably used the same password in multiple sites, for sure. And they're able to break into the new service, dump data there, and the cycle repeats. And it gets easier and easier to compromise more companies as a result. So stolen credentials are a huge issue. Strong identity can really just eliminate what is found to be used in 50% of breaches. And there are mature solutions. So something I'm actually pretty excited about is passwordless. Have folks heard of passwordless? Cool. Nice. Yeah, so passwordless is pretty exciting because now username and password is becoming not as important. And maybe you'll log into Instagram with your Face ID. Maybe you'll log into Instagram with your fingerprint. In which case, there's no password that can get stolen. And really, you are the key. Your biological body is the key that gains you access. So now these stolen passwords, that's not going to be enough. I think probably as a result, account takeover attacks are going to go way down. And talking about access, we really want access to be right-sized. So I talked about this earlier. We want access to be the right amount and for it to last as little as it should. So it shouldn't last longer than we need it. Here, this next point is super important for Zero Trust. We want it to be risk aware. So if you read the NIST guidance, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, it's like the big US government body. They talk about a trust algorithm. So in these systems, imagine it this way. I say I want access to my company's financial data. I'm requesting access to that document. And in a zero trust model, there should be taken many factors, all of this data, this real-time data that we have about me, about the device I'm accessing that from, requesting access from, my network location, all of these factors and more, the sensitivity of the document, right? All of these factors are taken into account to make a real-time decision on whether I should have access. So this goes to complete mediation, where we authorize every request. And this is about how we authorize every request. We authorize every request intelligently using real-time data sources. So what can this look like in practice? This could be, I try to access the financials for my company, but I'm able to prove my identity, great, but the laptop that I'm accessing it from has my company's endpoint detection and response software, or let's say antivirus software, and that software says that there's some chance, there's some indicators that maybe my laptop has a hacker on it, an attacker is on my laptop. Taking that into account and taking into account the sensitivity of the document, and maybe taking into account that the connection request is coming from a location that it shouldn't be coming from. Maybe it's coming from North Korea. The system decides to block my access for that specific request. And then it alerts the security team, perhaps, that suspicious activity happened. So every single request is being evaluated using real-time data about a number of sources, from endpoints, from the identity of the user, from the network location, and even threat intelligence streams. And all of that's being used to make really smart decisions that take into account the risk of authorizing access. Again, it should be fast and simple. So even though we're doing this intelligently and we're doing it every single time, it should be fast and simple. Here I have a huge crater picture. It's where a meteor struck. And fundamentally, this is called, the concept behind this is like the blast radius for right-sizing the access. What does blast radius mean? It means that if one person, one element of the system is compromised by an attacker, it's the amount of damage that occurs. So if everyone has root, if everyone has super administrator privileges, when anyone in this room gets compromised, let's imagine we're all one big happy company. When any one of us gets compromised, the whole company is compromised. So the blast radius is massive. Now, when you have right-sized access, then let's say one of us gets compromised, maybe they don't have a lot of access that they need for their job. Or maybe they do, but right now they haven't had a use for it, it's nighttime, so they don't have that access currently. And so because of that, the whole company is not compromised. Instead, it's just that one person, and that buys the defenders time to detect it, to remediate, to fix the issue. So the concept of blast radius is really, really important also. So resource protection, pretty fuzzy here for me actually, but I will say that I think it's one of the key concepts is going from the castle metaphor of having a perimeter being like the wall that protects the, the delicious candy inside of the M&M, to micro perimeters or micro segmentation. So how do we make it that every single resource has a castle wall around it instead of the network? We don't care if you're on the network. We assume the network is compromised. What we care about is protecting the resources. So how do we make sure the accounts, the data, those things have castle walls around them? And so you can request access to certain things, but then other things are also completely separated from you by walls that take deeper configuration changes to gain access to. The next point is super important, and this is true for like any security thing. You really want resource protection to be comprehensive. So if you don't even know what you have, if you don't have an inventory of your assets, and you don't know the sensitivity of each of those assets, then how can you really protect it? So let's say you put walls around everything, but then you just didn't even know that you had this whole shadow IT stuff with like super sensitive data, and that gets hacked. Clearly, that's not an outcome you want. So you really, really, really want to have a comprehensive understanding of all of the sensitive, valuable stuff at your company that could get attacked. And here, I said it was 3 and 3, so these are the other 3. There's like one key point I want to make here, which is that now we've gone from a world where maybe you proved who you were once. You like connected with the VPN, or you logged into some website, and that was one time, low scale, easy, right? Easy for you, easy for hackers. Now, we're going to a world of complete mediation where in the ideal case, every single request is being authorized. That's like many orders of magnitude more requests, more authorization. We're talking about, suddenly thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands from before like 1,000, right? So you need technology to support that. And you need to make those risk-aware decisions, you need that data about the laptop's health. You need the data about where the request is coming from. You need the data about the user's behavior to make those risk-aware, smart, intelligent decisions when authorizing requests. So kind of coming with all the first 3 things, you kind of need these things too. So you need to have monitoring and analytics. You need to have these whole data systems. And you also have to have policy and orchestration where you want to kind of be able to say, every laptop at our organization has antivirus, has EDR, has up-to-date patches. And if it doesn't, I want to block them. You need to be able to express yourself so you can configure this globally for your entire organization. So this is about creating leverage so that you can control this big mess, which is a modern organization. And of course, you need people. So people are super important for cybersecurity. It's not just technology. You need staff who are constantly monitoring, tweaking, responding, planning the system developments, developing things. So the operations really matter. The team really matters. Okay, so that's like a lot of the technical stuff that I want to get through. I tried to keep it high level for everyone. But I also just have a list of insights I agree with. So again, these aren't new ideas, nothing new under the sun. But these are ideas that I think are relevant, that I like and I agree with based on my experience. So talking about resource inventory earlier, knowing what you have, I think it's super important that you have just good management. And I think the companies want to have good management, right? Every company wants good IT, and security really benefits from just good IT practices. So you really, as a security person, you really want your IT team to be great, and you really want them to be healthy and successful. Because you're going to benefit from them having things organized, having things under control, so you really want them to be strong. That also goes for reliability. So there's this great book called Building Secure and Reliable Systems from Google. And a lot of the concepts that we talked about, limiting blast radius, having great visibility into the system behavior, these are things that benefit reliability as well. So it's not just about security. So let's say you're working in a big company, you want to move the company towards zero trust, and you need allies, you need people who you'll work with. Your allies might be maybe the SRE team, reliability teams, because you have similar goals. And if you want to make big changes, you're going to need a lot of people on the same page supporting those changes, working on them. So it's really important to kind of, as a security person, find allies, find people you want to work with and where your interests are aligned. And I'll say that zero trust is a silly name. There's always trust. I think the key idea of zero trust is that it's elevating trust. It's saying that trust is really important for security. It's saying that we really need to think about how we design and manage trust in our systems to be secure. So it's about giving the right amount of trust at the right times and managing all of that well, doing it in a way that's not too risky. And it's not about getting rid of trust. There's always trust. And it's not just about technology. I want to emphasize this. So if you go and you're like, I'm going to make my company zero trust, and you Google and you're like, Cloudflare sells something, Palo Alto Networks sells something, let me just go buy that. That's not how you do it, right? So I hope that is clear. It's about, there is technology, there's also people, there's also process. And you really, if you think about it only as a technology problem, you will fail. And these are big changes, right? This is like architecture level change. If you start from zero, it's probably easier. But if you're trying to change an existing organization, you should expect this is going to take many years, probably. And you should set those expectations, with internal stakeholders like management, peers. And finally, expect change. So right now, I do think zero trust is a great idea or set of ideas. The reality is these principles have been around for almost 40 years. Right now, they're packaged into this nice brand, zero trust, and the technology is there to support implementing it more than we've been able to. And there's a lot of movement and excitement about it. So it's great, but I don't expect this to be, we figured it out, we've solved security. I think that, you should expect that right now, you're not going to suffer, really, I don't think, for going in the right direction here. It's a direction, and these directions are tried and true. They're like I said, like 40 years old. But you should expect that there will be new things, and that's okay. But you're going to have to really be able to understand what they are so you don't get tricked into buying stuff you don't need. So that's where, again, the staff is so important. That's it. Thank you, everyone. And I think we have 5 minutes for questions. So if anyone has questions, I can try my best to answer them. Yes?
How come it's so hard to set up secure identity? Or why is it so common that it's not secure?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think part of the issue is it requires changing user behavior. And changing user behavior and business workflows is difficult. For example, let's say you have everyone do multi-factor authentication at your company. You say, everyone, now you have to use Google Authenticator. And they're like, I lost my phone and now I can't get into my accounts. So you have to be ready at that point. How are you actually going to prove who they are so that you give them access again? Especially if it's remote work. How do they get into the systems to even let you know? How do you know they are who they say they are? Maybe you do a video call and someone recognizes them. Maybe it's a deep fake. I don't know. So identity is really tricky. I think it's kind of something that you like establish, and then that operation of establishing it, like maybe you trade a GPG key or something, or you provision a YubiKey, a hardware security key. But then if something happens after that, you have to reestablish it. And it's kind of expensive to do that. And it takes business processes, it takes staffing, and it takes changes in user behavior. So I think that's why it's difficult. And there's not enough cybersecurity talent who have done it, know how to do it. I think if you have the leadership, it's totally doable, right? Many companies have done it. But there's a huge shortage of cybersecurity talent. So we need to create those people who can help lead companies down that good path. And that takes skill and experience. Other questions? Yes?
What about cloud-based solutions? How do you protect data in cloud storages if we can't even have access to this data, like it's not on our servers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think fundamentally with the cloud, you're trusting that they're going to do the right thing for a lot of it. And you're trusting that they're not going to get compromised, and that if they do, your data won't be compromised. And that's a decision, right? And it's probably a good decision. I mean, they have a good track record. They have great security teams. But I think there's the other half of it, which is how your staff uses the cloud and the resources that you've put in the cloud, and how you keep that safe. And I think if you look at cloud, when company data is compromised in the cloud, I think often it's from that side, like 99% of the time. Someone leaves an S3 bucket open, misconfiguration. Someone's account gets hacked and they didn't have two-factor authentication. And because of these things, attackers gain access. So I don't think, if you put your data in AWS, generally AWS isn't the one that's going to leak your data. It's more about how you're using the cloud, how you secure the access to those resources. Which is really, really important, and it's something that has led to a lot of data breaches, so it's a great question. Cool. I think we can do one more question, if anyone has one. Yes?
Companies invest in some resolutions, like for example, if someone stole the laptop and it can phone some such an attack, and should companies invest in resolutions, like specialized chips or whatever?
So I think that's a great question, and that's totally the direction that the big tech companies have gone. Earlier in the talk, I talked about strong identity. How do we have high confidence in identity? Now, if we look at things that aren't stored in hardware, such as a file, right, an SSH key on your hard drive, if your computer is compromised, someone can just take that key, copy it, use it from elsewhere, right? Now, if that key was generated inside of a secure enclave, and an attacker hacks your computer, they can't copy the key from the hardware. So at least with this specific case of identity, the benefit that comes from hardware is that you can start to have these guarantees, these invariants, that, for example, only one copy of this secure, cryptographic material exists in the universe, unless someone goes and destroys this thing to maybe be able to get the secret SSH key out, the private key, let's say, if it's asymmetric. So I think hardware has a super important role to play, and you see this with secure boot also. How do we actually make sure that our operating systems aren't tampered with? How do we make sure that our identity can't be stolen easily? And a lot of the passwordless stuff, like Face ID, fingerprint authentication, that stuff is all happening in hardware. The secret keys that are being used are all, in hardware. So it's super important, and it absolutely has a role to play because it gives us the strongest level of security guarantees that I know of, at least. Cool. Thank you, everyone.